So now, as you can see over here in my layering stack, I have a new white layer sitting above this template layer. And we have the template. We have the armature, which is somewhere in there. There it is. We have the armature. We have the template. And now we're going to do a finish layer over the top of that. Oh, and then a bunch of drawings from other stuff. Let's turn those off. Okay, so now going back up to the top of our stack here. New drawing, new layer. Okay, zooming in on one area. I'm now going to try and articulate what's going on there using everything that I've got here. So there's cloth right here. Then there's the length of the shoulder. And then the material kind of sticks off of the shoulder a little bit. Then we hit the tricep. Then the material sticks off again, right along in here. Comes around this way. And then we've got the cuff of the shirt. And then, of course, the arm underneath that. So we're not just drawing the clothing. We're drawing the whole thing interacting. So here's the arm now. Draw this down through the wrist. The turning of the tendons into the wrist bones. The folding skin across the top of the extensors. And then the fingers, the thumb group. Bring that around to the rest of the fingers. And then solve the rest of the details of the hand later. Coming back in here now, here is the majority of the sweater. There is one fold that sticks out right here. And this is going to be my first attempt at a pipe fold. So there's one. And here's the other. Now the pipe folds are going to have these rounded lines that cut over them. And I'm going to do this because I am tracking the pipe fold. I am trying to find the direction that it is traveling in. And I'm trying to find that dimensionally. It's not just, well, I got a couple ellipses and I'm good to go. They change, right? Because the arm is doing this. The ellipses that these pipe folds are made from are also changing perspective. Oops. Changing perspective as they go up and over and around to the other side. So that's basically what I'm trying to do here, is I'm trying to determine how these ellipses stack up in 3D space. Along here, they flatten out through here. There's another one right underneath it, kind of doing the same thing, although the folds are zigzagging. And we're going to change up the design of the folds a little bit once we render it. This is still giving us a point from which we can start everything off. Without that starting point, it's all a guess. Everything is just a guess. This comes down into the armpit. And it changes direction and perspective. Then there's two folds right here and right here, little tiny ones. And then, of course, in the very end of it all, with the last rendered stage, we would come in here and get very specific about what is overlapping, which cylinder form is overlapping which cylinder form. These two are kind of squeezing into each other, but this one is overlapping this one is overlapping this one. It comes along through here and it overlaps all of this material, and I'll work my way along here and clean up all of those different edges. These fan out and dissipate right across here. These stay structural along here, and that's ultimately how I'm going to end up shading things in the end, which today we're not really going to shade. I mean, if you want to try it out, go ahead, but I'm not grading you on your shading. I'm actually grading you on your mapping. This is a mapping process. And I want to make it very clear that the mapping process is as solid as it can be. And for some reason, Zoom does not like working right now. There we go. Okay, so now there's a lot of subtle folds in here. There's these subtle pipe folds right along in here. And that goes up and connects with this one. And these are things that later on when I'm rendering that I will have to become aware of, because this is the link between this set of folds down here and this set of folds over here. Without that bridge between it, it's going to look a little strange. Alright, I'm going to increase my brush size again, then come back up here into the neck and start working on this series of folds. Now across this line, here's the cylinder. The cylinder gets really big, right? It dips way underneath. And I'm going to work that out as I develop more of these other cylinders. So here's this one. This comes down this way. It turns the corner, or turns a corner. There's the cylinder lines. The material drops down this way and turns in. This turns around the body and goes in the other direction. And then we have a zigzag fold here, but basically what I'm going to do is turn it into two pipes that blend together right along in here. So now this pipe fold is coming down this way, and then the one right above it is actually much larger. See, it's kind of doing this. It's coming from way over here, then turning into a pipe fold, then turning into this pipe fold, and then turning into the rest of the material that's resting against his torso. Chin, throat, neck. The ears somewhere right around in here. Back of his head. Forehead. Nose. Where the mouth is going to go. Just so we have it in the picture space, it's kind of necessary. It's the one thing that helps us see proportions properly, so it does need to go in there. Alright, so now we get into the bottom half of the shirt here. Here is a fold coming this way. There's two pipe folds that turn the corner like this, almost like lips. And then it goes back this way. That's the length of it, or the whatever you want to call it. The volume of it extending off of the body. Then we get into the pants and such. Over here we have all of this material pushing here and pushing here. Again, designing the pipe folds, notice how both of these are spreading out and becoming the bigger bulk of the material. That's part of what I was explaining earlier in the smaller demonstrations, that your pipe folds have to pattern out or they have to spread back out into the bigger material, the body of the material. And so whenever you're finding that a fold is disappearing on you, it's actually doing that. It's terminating into the rest of the cloth. And down at the bottom of these two particular folds where they come around, it's going to create that eye of the fold. It's very, very light and very subtle, but it is in there. And that's the terminating point for both of those pipe folds. I want to put that in there just to help recognize what's going on. This one turns around this way, so there's the rest of the radiation there. Then when we get into the pant leg, we're going to be talking about lots of small shapes in that space. The folds are much, much smaller. We would have to zoom in on this a little bit more. And with each one of these pipe folds, we're talking micro pipes here. There's 1, here's 2, 3, 4, 5. And each one of these has its own curve, has its own perspective. Of course, following the rest of them is the key here, making sure that they all work together in conjunction with one another. These spread out. And there's a bunch of them in here. There's a whole series of them in here because of the way the material's bunching together. But you see now there's a pattern forming. We have a way of developing a drawing so that we can bring in these subtle points of architecture very simply at first. This is the simple, right? We start with the armature. We look for simple lines. And if you're doing something like cartooning or comics, those lines might be the place that you end your folds because you aren't looking for volume. You aren't looking for three-dimensionality necessarily in your animation or in your comic book or whatever it might be that you're illustrating. Not all products end up in total three-dimensionality. Some of them stay very flat and no-tan-like. Some of them stay very graphic. But regardless, this template that we have here is useful for all of it. Whether you're making something really simple or you're making something highly complex and rendered, we got you covered here. So just like everything else, all I'm doing at this point is I'm fulfilling all of these cylinder lines. There's a few over in here that change direction, and these are important because, again, all these radiation points are the linkage that connects one segment to the next. So without this angle here, we wouldn't be able to jump into these angles up along the shoulder. And then those angles, of course, zigzag like this, and then those go down like this and so forth. So there's a pattern that's happening all throughout the material because, again, the material is one unit surrounding the figure. Whatever happens on one side displaces the other side, right? It doesn't have additional volume elsewhere. It's all one volume. Now, I'm going to do this. This isn't something that I necessarily want you to do right now. I'm going to show it. If you choose to do it, then just make sure that it's on its own layer and it's not distracting, because I don't want distractions from being able to read your homework. Your homework needs to be legible on its own without extra stuff clouding it up and making it hard to work with. All right, so why all these pipes now? What's going on with this? Well, when we start to colorize our picture, I'm actually going to turn the blending mode in this function into multiply so I can see what I'm building underneath. The very first place we would always begin our picture is the local value, right? We want to start with local values. Something that addresses the overall color content of the object that we're painting, local value. This is not relatable to light. This is just based upon its own body color, its own internal or physical colorization. Internal in this case means contained within its own object, internalized there, not externalized in the atmosphere of things. Alright, and then new layer for the shadows, and I could just basically keep the same value. I don't have to switch values. And then along each of these pipes now, I'm going to start shading. The underside of this one comes up into a halftone, out into the light. The underside of this one stamps down into darkness. And that's basically what I'm doing with all of these. I'm going to the underside of every pipe fold that I've made, and I'm shading it down darker. The inside of all of this to the underside of the pipe fold along here is all one shady unit. It's all one shaded space. Shadow patterns along here, shadow patterns within the half lock folds, right? That's the underside of one pipe at least. The undersides of those, and then down the side plane of the body. And where this stuff gets a little bit messy, we just basically erase it out because it's on its own layer. and uniformly conform it to the volume that you're working within. And that's how you would shade your picture. Well, mind you, the first place that you would actually go would be to the bigger picture, right? You want to make the cylinder forms. Here's the cylinder form of the arm, right? This is actually wrapping around like so. And the darkness kind of ends on the side plane of the arm over there. And then the top of the arm is a bit lighter. Underneath here has a little bit of a cast shadow to it. But so there's the cylinder form of the arm. Then we go back to the body color and we begin specking out the shadow patterns. And when we do this, we don't need to make the shadow patterns even darker than they are already. They're blocking themselves in, or we're blocking them into the already existing form shadow of the arm. We're just trying to group it up and connect the dots together now. And it makes drawing and painting this so much easier to do because there's organization now. I have a completely organized process for getting it all taken care of. Slightly lighter value along here. And remember, I'm on a multiply layer, so all I'm doing is I'm embellishing the shadow patterns right on top of the body color. Once I know my shadow patterns are working, I get to the body color, all is well. All is well. This comes up this way. Gets a little bit darker in here. It's a little bit darker on the underside over here and over here. And that's how you shade it. So the shading sits right on top of everything else. And notice that the shading is not very dark yet. Well, we can always go in and we can add darkness to that as well. The very last thing you would do, and if you've taken my figured construction class, then you've already done this process. Very last thing you do is look for either the color of this space right over here so that we can relinquish the line work, or a slightly lighter value to embellish the highlighted surfaces on the top, which are also going to destroy the line work, getting rid of the line work and burying it back into the fabric. And even our highlights are going to change in their brightness as they go from one spot of the body to the other. They're not going to stay the same lightness all over. As we're dropping into these shadows, the lightest areas are not as bright as the lightest areas up on top of the shoulders. And then we come in here and clean up these edges and so forth, and that's basically how you wrap it all up. So your very last layer then is a cleanup layer, and it organizes all the rest of what you had already done previously. And that's an easy way of painting. You control your local tones, you control your light source and the brightness of your light source. Then at the very end you control your surface texturing and your surface nuances. And everything is built up from a core. Everything starts with something really basic and it works its way up into something very complicated as we have here. And that's what we do. So this step right here is a bonus step. I don't expect you to do this. In fact, I don't want to see this if it completely covers up everything that you've done. So the next thing and the last thing here I want to show you is how you're going to turn this in.